All right, so I just want to do a quick overview of the campaign for People's NHI. Not spend too much time on it because we are quite far behind time. So what I'd like to do is cover we've spoken about our current health crisis, but I want to just go over some of that again, and then how the NHI came about, briefly. We know quite a lot about that, so I'm not going to spend too much time, and then talk about the evolution of our campaign, because it has changed over the years, and it's still changing, and it's alive, and it's open to whoever takes part in it to sort of push it in the direction that seems to be appropriate at the time. So before 1996, just the struggle for health in the country. So under apartheid, we had 13 or 14, depending on how you look at it, departments of health in the country. We had one for each homeland, then one for the other population groups, and we also had a private and public sector. Strangely enough, under apartheid, poor people could get free health care in public health facilities, in public hospitals, for example. Groote Hospital is an example, Red Cross Hospital is an example. But that free health care was in segregated facilities, where often the care on the one side was not as good as the care on the other side. And usually the professor had the white facility, the white ward, and so on. So it was unequal, but it was quite high quality care in the public sector. There was a small private sector during the apartheid time. And as we know, social determinants of health, the country was massively unequal. So that's a bit of background. But on the positive side, during that time, there was a kind of very vibrant civil society internally. There was the UDF, there was COSATU, which was then not political. It was kind of for workers. There was a mass democratic movement which combined all of this. And we had a vibrant health civil society that was preparing for the post-apartheid health system, essentially. And there was also, at a broader level, a broader sort of civil society campaign that, for example, mainly the UDF, which was campaigning for a people-centered development program at the end of apartheid that became the RDP. The Health Civil Society developed what became the ANC 1994 Health Plan. And these things kind of culminated in 1996 into the Constitution with a Bill of Rights that gave all of us equal rights to access to health care. So that's just a bit of background before 1996. Then in 1996, there was a major disaster and I think in our view, a betrayal of the country. When the RDP was dropped, the ANC health plan landed up on bookshelves and started gathering dust. The ANC health plan was based on primary health care, a single national health system that would provide equal care for everyone, a unitary system. The RDP was an intersectoral approach to broader socio-economic development that was housed in the presidency. In 1996, so this was kind of coming out of the struggle. In 1996, between 94 and 96, between the election, I forgot to say that the RDP and the ANC health plan were the election tickets that the ANC used in the 1994 election campaign. Okay, so we went from the RDP to GEAR. GEAR being the growth, employment and redistribution neoliberal policy that came from outside. It was the World Bank and the IMF and the World Trade Organization that became, the government decided to consult them about the best way forward for the economy. So the RDP was chucked out and GEAR came in, and the idea was that with broad economic with black economic empowerment, there would be the creation of a kind of business class which would create lots of jobs, and money would trickle down from that to the poor. Now, since the 60s, that has never worked. You know, the trickle-down theory for health, for economies just it doesn't work. And it has never worked, and yet we took it. So we adopted an economic policy based on neoliberalism that is known to increase inequality. So we get this inherited inequality from apartheid, and we adopt an economic policy that actually makes inequality worse. So from our 14 health departments, we ended up with 2, private and public. But because of GEAR, the public sector, and this is where all the skepticism about public services actually, I think, has its roots, is that the public sector was the subject of austerity budget. We saw that public health expenditure going down in the early 90s, at the time when the AIDS epidemic kind of hit, and the AIDS epidemic was mainly carried by the public health sector, which was having its funds reduced. So we had public sector austerity and privatization. So the idea behind neoliberalism is that services are best delivered by the so-called efficient private sector business, and that the public sector is inefficient and governments are stupid, they can't run services. And so that's the kind of philosophical basis. So public sector austerity, growth in the private sector, and growing social and economic inequality. The Bill of Rights was also kind of neglected because the Bill of Rights has in it rights to virtually all the social determinants of health. So that was like the immediate after 1996 period. So one of the changes in the health system from pre-apartheid to post-apartheid is this. So we used to have European hospitals and non-European hospitals, and it changed to hospitals for the rich and hospitals for the poor. Now, not everything was bad because, you know, the public sector has kind of rolled out a lot, and we had water, sanitation, and so on delivered, but not efficiently, not as effectively as it could have been. Is everyone with me so far? Yes. Just put up your hands if anyone disagrees. So then comes Polokwane, ANC's conference. And the resolution is passed to adopt a national health insurance to meet the constitutional obligation. This is actually in the government gazette that gazettes the NHI, the constitutional obligations to provide everyone with health care. Right. So that happened at Polokwane in 2007. So that's the background to this. So essentially what happened is that the NHI put health and healthcare back on the kind of national agenda. So it became a prominent issue. People started talking about health again. You know, there was the HIV crisis, and civil society responded through the Treatment Action Campaign. But basically, civil society in the sort of post-19 sorry, post 1994, 96 era, civil society became very weak. The UDF was disbanded and so on. And it was kind of brought back to life by the TAC around treatment access. So we picked up this campaign. I took this slide from a 2013 presentation, but the campaign started a long way before that, but I just took this slide. The PHM launched here in 2003, and we had a number of activities. I won't go through all of them. I'll focus on the campaigns that are where the red arrow is, because that's what we're talking about today. But these are all our other activities at the time. And the main campaign became the campaign for People's NHI. So what we did was we kind of started to build a coalition called the NHI Coalition. And we started training people about advocacy, health worker advocacy. And although we didn't call it this, we had a kind of NHI watch, much like Global Health Watch, to watch what was happening in the developments around the National Health Insurance. And the kind of thing we never really got properly to grips with was a vision. You know, it was easy to criticize, but to develop a vision for what actually we want, what would be best for the country, we're kind of getting sort of there now, I think, when we're talking about the People's NHI and our current understanding of it. Okay, so this was the kind of NHI coalition about a few years ago. So we had Section 27, TAC, Women on Farms Project, NHI, the union that sort of claimed to be the main parent of the NHI, Black Sash, Rural Health Advocacy Program, Rural Doctors, EarthLife Africa Environmental Program, AHP. What's AHP again? I can't remember. Anybody remember? Oh, yeah, that's right. Soul City, the Progressive Health Youth Movement, and Sangoko, which I'm never sure if it actually existed or not. But anyway, Sangoko was part of the coalition. Now, a lot of those are no longer active in the coalition, and it's mainly PHM, Section 27, TAC, and RAP. So the next kind of part of it was advocacy training. So we provided training for Nahawu shop stewards on the NHI, on primary health care, and what they all meant, because we thought that Nahawu, as a big, important health sector union, had the muscle. We didn't have numbers. We're still small, and we were always small, but Nahawu was potentially, and they were wanting education on the NHI and on primary health care, and students, and then activists. So that kind of program became the South African People's Health University, taking its sort of inspiration from the International People's Health University. So the SAPHU is a kind of university without walls that goes to different places. And we trained initially trade unionists and activists, but became more focused on community health workers recently. Everything clear so far? Okay. So the NHI watch part of it, there was sort of, I think, two areas. We never really monitored pilot sites properly. But anyway, so the one was to look, we knew that there would be powerful vested interests who would see this NHI fund as a pot of money to kind of benefit from. So who are these vested interests? So we know from our earlier presentation this morning that both the public health sector and the private health sector are in a crisis. The public sector is in a crisis because of austerity, 2 decades of under-budgeting. the private sector is in a crisis because it has grown out of its, when cancer grows too fast, it doesn't have enough blood to supply it. So it kind of became, as we know, unsustainable. What's happening is membership is dropping. They're cutting the services they will fund, and so on. And so for the vested interest thing, what we were worried about was that there'd be privatization of this NHI fund that would be sort of taken by the private sector to bail them out of their crisis. We were worried about, in other words, corporate capture of the NHI fund and corruption, which we've spoken about a bit this morning, where money goes for a purpose, but it gets sidetracked into buying Mercedes-Benzes for politicians and whatever. Okay, so that was like the vested interest part. The other part was to analyze not only the white paper, but the green paper and then the white paper that came out afterwards, and to provide some critical analysis of what the developing policy was going to do. So we did this and we sent submissions to the Department of Health. I don't think they ever replied to us. And our key concerns in our submissions were that this whole process was happening up there behind closed doors, that we didn't have a clue what was going on, that it was very slow. Remember that it was 2009, 2007, the Polokwane conference. In 2009, was it 2009 or 11 that the first white paper came out? I think it was 11. So it was gazetted in 2009 in the government gazette, then another 2 years for the green paper, and then 5 years for the white paper. So there's something clearly happening up there that isn't kind of moving in one direction. There's fighting, there's vested interests who are squabbling for what's going on. So we're worried about that. The issue of single payer or many payers, these are our current sort of key concerns. How does the Department of Health and the powers that be understand the idea of universal health coverage or universal health care? There are different interpretations, which I think we need to try and suss out over the next day or two. And then we were worried, obviously, about this big pool of money. And given the situation around the country where big pools of money sort of seem to come together, what would happen to that big pool of money? Who would administer it? Would it go to where it's supposed to go? And so on. And these are still concerns that we have. Okay. So I think this is sort of my second last slide. So here we are today at the end of this long process with a huge health crisis, with a hope of fixing it, at least the health system part of it, through this national health insurance. So what are the important issues? We've spoken about most of them this morning: universal access and equity, the balance between private and public, and who will do what and how will that kind of work out. Human resources, training of human resources, distribution of human resources. And this has kind of led us to think a bit about our campaign. The NHI, or talking about NHI, to most people is like speaking about something that is abstract. We don't kind of understand. We don't understand it, to be honest. We've seen, what they've written in the white papers and green papers. We've got our understanding of it, but we know there's a lot of stuff happening that we don't know. We don't know what's going on behind the closed doors in the corridors of power. So I don't think there's anyone in the country, not even the Department of Health, who really understands what is being meant by NHI in this country. But everyone experiences the health system. Everyone experiences it. It's something that people can understand because you go and you either have to wait till the next day, or you're in a queue from 4 o'clock in the morning, or you rude, we've heard about rude staff members, drug stockouts. These are what people are experiencing. So the question is, instead of talking abstractly about this NHI, that's kind of an abstract thing, should we not be talking about the health system and what kind of a health system we need and would want in the country in the future, and developing a vision jointly for what kind of a health system we're looking for? The other thing I just want to add, since I'm old, is this thing, that once in a generation, an opportunity like this comes up. It happens about once every 30 years. We had ours, our real one, when we were young and active and running around and so on, at the time of the RDP and the ANC health plan and that time. Unfortunately, what we kind of stood for kind of got dissipated. And this is the next opportunity. And we have to, as a country, decide what kind of a country we want. These questions about what my tax, this is my money. I'm already paying tax. How can I put money into this? What kind of a society do we want? How do we get social solidarity? What does it mean? Can we heal the nation? Not only individuals, but the country through the NHI. So those are some of the questions that we have to look at. And it's sort of, working on a vision for health. So I think I'll stop there. Any questions or comments? Somebody say something.
Thank you for that. And you've touched on this in the presentation, and it's just something that's been going through my head the whole day, which is that this idea of one uniform concept of NHI and what seems like the vast number of unanswered questions and unclear things that hang over this concept. And I suppose this is a question, or maybe it's just a comment, like what are the mechanisms for holding accountable the people who are to find those answers and to find some kind of unity in a concept, if that exists? Is it government doing their thing behind closed doors? I guess the responsibility falls on everyone, on academia, on civil society. But to me, that's like this vast gap, which, is very ambiguous space there. So, yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. We cannot rely on the state to do this now. I think we should be thinking of doing the right things now, but actually, it's not going to come like a magic bullet. There's so much in all sectors of the state that are not working at the moment. So the private sector can't do it. The state at the moment can't do it. It has to be the state. It has to be the government and the state that does it. But we're in a situation now where that doesn't seem possible, which puts the big role on civil society. Civil society needs organization. It doesn't matter actually too much if you're thinking about being in a health civil society. You can be in housing, you can be in education, it doesn't, to me, matter that much. But if, because it's actually, all of this influences our health. as long as we develop activism. That's the key thing.
Thanks for that. I guess I have a bit of a comment more than anything. And on the one hand, yes, like mobilizing around this issue is extremely important, but it's also a very difficult issue to mobilize around, I guess. So on the one hand, the way the media currently paints the health system as a health system in crisis is inaccurate, because not everywhere is the system in crisis, and there are positive experiences that we need to learn from. But on the other hand, the health system has been in this form of crisis for many, many years. So, I mean, those of us who've been working in the public sector, the way the media now portrays the health system and the truths about the health system is a huge step forward, because for many years there was denial of the crises, for example, in the Eastern Cape, which is mostly where I've worked. So on the one hand, we have health getting media attention for the first time, actually, I think since the days you guys described. So on the one hand, that's a great thing. You know, finally you have health on the political agenda, the possibilities of change. But on the other hand, while the NHI holds some promise, that it's a finance mechanism. That's what it is. It's an insurance, a finance mechanism, and it gets conflated with a health system,
yes.
You know, and financing is one part of the health system. So it becomes, in addition to so many negotiations happening behind closed doors and the threat of private capture of the fund itself, it's being proposed as a solution that will fix everything. And when you go to Motsoaledi speak, when you hear Motsoaledi speak, there's no doubt that he's passionately committed to improving the health system. There's no doubt. But of course, there are things that go above that are part of the politics and part of the political game he has to play. But I guess it's hard for me to imagine mobilizing around this issue, because it's a financing mechanism only, and what we need is a broader health system. And so what we need is to be, I guess, building a movement that's much more about what health system we want and what unitary fund could be part of that. But at the same time, NHI offers a political window of opportunity to actually jump on it. So when Motsoaledi hears us saying, we support the fundamental principles of NHI, but you know what he hears is that we aren't in support of overall health reform. So it's a difficult thing to work with, and we have a huge. I mean, because of the poor consultation processes, most healthcare workers either don't know what NHI is, don't know how it will affect them, or certainly don't feel invested in it. So it's a difficult thing. We were talking during lunch. It's not like mobilizing around ARVs, which is an easy thing to fight for. This is a very different thing, because it's about health and it's about so much more as well. So then when you mobilize, how do you mobilize? With who? Who do you connect up with? What are you fighting for? You're fighting for something that's so opaque you can't possibly understand it. As you said, does anyone understand it? So I don't know how we work with that, and I don't know what ideas everybody has. But I guess that's what I'm grappling with.
So, I mean, I think that's why we're kind of shifting the focus from here to here, you know, because is kind of comprehensible. And, there's a hand,
Yeah, thank you. At least after lunch, I'm agreeing with people, you know. So, as a follow-up...
I always give you more lunch.
Yes. Honestly, there must be more lunch now. Because if we can look at the history, we had changes of Minister of Finance. You listen to the MTB midterm budget speech, you listen to the annual budget speech. They'll say the same thing, a little paragraph there towards the end. I knew it by heart, just that last year it was not repeated because it was another minister. And then you go to the Minister of Health. He reads the same paragraph that we are tabling the NHI bill. We are going to discuss it in Parliament. So then you ask yourself, what is really wrong? I cannot defend that, obviously. I don't know what is happening, even though there are my colleagues somewhere else in the corners. But I cannot defend them. But the problem comes when we talk of mobilizing, when you don't have answers. That's a true issue. You cannot. It was supposed to be discussed in Cabinet, I think in January or so. Always, then it was pushed to the 16th of what. I don't know whether they discussed it, but always they'll tell you, this is a priority. So I understand the frustration that people go on, but if you follow like the politics and read all those budget speech and all those, you'll see that, no, we don't understand where we are. So at least I'm following up today on my colleagues. Thank you.
Mine is more of a question to a group of people in this room. And actually, my heart breaks because of what I perceive as missed opportunities. So when you speak about the National Health Plan, you speak about the RDP, you speak about GEAR, you speak about all these proposed reforms for the health system, and we've missed it, or the generations have missed that opportunity. And now we are presented in this generation with an opportunity. So my question, maybe to the older generation, is what lessons have we learned from the past, so that we don't repeat them in this generation and speak 50 years from now about a possible NHI that could have reformed our health system, but it didn't, or we didn't use that opportunity in the way that it's supposed to be used.
Can I exercise a prerogative here? We have to stop this discussion. We can flag it. I think that's an important question, because that's asking us what we can offer, or what we...
Advice, yes. Advice.
So we need to move, because Ekta, who's doing the next presentation, has to catch a flight. And we're very conscious of that. And so I'm going to step aside, but we can carry on this discussion after.